Imagine standing in the heat of a summer sun. No shade, no food, no water for 4 days straight. Your chest is pierced through with wooden hooks. Those hooks are connected by a thick cord to a towering sacred pole planted in the earth. And now you lean back, deliberately, the full weight of your own body, pulling against your skin, against your flesh, against everything your nervous system is screaming at you. And you dance, not because you are forced to, not because someone put a weapon to your head, but because you chose this. Because your people believe that the deepest sacrifice earns the deepest blessing. Because you are not just enduring pain, you are offering it. That is the Sundance, and it is only the beginning of what we are going to uncover today. Welcome to Frontier Uncensored. I am your host, Dustin, and today we are diving deep into 9 revelations about Native American civilization, culture, and history that most history books simply glossed over. These are stories of warriors, diplomats, inventors, and pioneers, many of them women who shape the world we live in right now. Stick with me to the end, because the final fact about Native American female warriors is one that genuinely rewrote how I think about frontier history. If this is your kind of content, hit that subscribe button and let us get into it. Let us go back to that ceremony, because the Sundance deserves more than a surface reading. Among the Plains tribes, particularly the Lakota Sioux, the Cheyenne, and the Arapaho, the Sundance was the most spiritually significant event a person could participate in. This was not folklore. This was not legend. This was a living, practiced ceremony that continued for centuries, and in many communities continues still. It was organized by a spiritual leader, typically in response to a vision or a deep communal need for blessing. The entire preparation could span weeks. Participants would enter a period of fasting, sometimes lasting several days, leading into the ceremony itself. No food, severely limited water. They would spend those days in isolation, inside a structure called a fasting teepee, hours deep in prayer, in meditation, in confronting their own minds when hunger and thirst stripped away every distraction. Then the ceremony itself would begin. Dancers moved in circles around a sacred central pole for hours, sometimes for days, driven by drums and spiritual songs. The rhythm would become everything. The world outside the circle would cease to exist, and then came the piercing. Wooden skewers, or bone hooks, were driven through the flesh of the chest, the back, or both. Cords connected those hooks to the central pole, and the dancer would lean back, placing their entire body weight on those piercings, and keep moving, keep dancing. The pain was not incidental. It was the point. It was the sacrifice. The belief was that through this offering, the dancer could enter a visionary state, could commune directly with Wakantanka, the Great Spirit, and could return carrying something for their community that no comfortable man could ever bring back. Participation was always voluntary, and those who completed the Sundance earned profound respect that lasted a lifetime. Think about what that says about a civilization. Think about the discipline, the spiritual architecture, the communal meaning embedded in that single ceremony. And keep that image in your mind, because everything we discuss today connects back to it. A people willing to endure that much for meaning are a people worth understanding completely. Now, here is something you probably never thought about on a Tuesday afternoon. Next time someone calls you a chipmunk, or you crack open a pecan, or the neighbor's dog loses its mind over a skunk in the yard, consider this. You are speaking a Native American language, and you have been your entire life. The Algonquian language family is one of the most widespread indigenous language groups in North American history, covering hundreds of distinct dialects across the continent. When European settlers arrived and began pointing at things they had never seen before, they did what humans always do. They borrowed the words from the people who already knew what those things were called. The word chipmunk comes from the Ojibwe term ajidamo, referring to those small striped rodents darting through the undergrowth. Early settlers heard the word, approximated the sounds they could manage, and within a generation it became chipmunk. The pecan comes from the Illinois language of the Algonquian family, adapted from pacani, meaning that particular type of nut, and skunk, that legendary word for one of nature's most effective defense mechanisms, comes from the Abenaki Seganku. These are not minor footnotes. This is linguistic inheritance. The English language absorbed dozens of words from Native American peoples because those peoples were here first, understood this land first, and named its creatures and plants with the precision of thousands of years of observation. Every time you say raccoon, moose, caribou, toboggan, or hammock, you are carrying a fragment of indigenous knowledge with you. The language survived even when the people who created it were being pushed to the margins of history. Now, speaking of things that were taken and turned into something else entirely, let us talk about the sport that millions of people watch every weekend without knowing its origin. Lacrosse is the oldest team sport in North America, not the oldest adapted from somewhere else, the oldest, full stop. Historians trace it back as far as the 12th century among various Native American tribes, with particularly deep roots among the southeastern nations, most notably the Cherokee. They called it stick ball, and let me be clear, this was not a recreational pickup game. This was a serious cultural institution. Matches could involve hundreds of players. Teams could travel miles between villages to compete. Games could last for days. The field had no out of bounds. The goals could be miles apart. Players used distinctive sticks woven from wood and leather, and the ball itself evolved over time from solid wood to deerskin, stuffed with fur. Injuries were common. Games were played for religious purposes, for conflict resolution between tribes, and as a form of physical and spiritual preparation for young warriors. When French Jesuit missionaries in Canada's St. Lawrence Valley first encountered the game in the 1630s, they were baffled by its intensity. A missionary named Jean de Brebeuf watched the Huron play, and noticing the curved stick resembled a bishop's pastoral staff, called it Lacrosse. The name stuck. In 1834, the Kanyenkeha, Ka-people, also known as the Mohawk, demonstrated the game in Montreal. By 1856, a Canadian dentist named Dr. William George Beers had formalized a set of rules: reduced player counts, a rubber ball, a redesigned stick. By 1860, lacrosse was Canada's favorite summer sport. It went to England for exhibition matches in 1867. In 1876, Queen Victoria watched a game and reportedly called it charming. A game invented in the forests of North America, played for spiritual and communal survival, had become entertainment for royalty. That is a journey. But here is what I want you to hold on to before we move on. The people who invented that game, who built those spiritual ceremonies, who named the animals in those forests, were also simultaneously building diplomatic systems so advanced that historians argue they directly influenced the founding documents of the United States. We will get back to that. But first, one of the most remarkable love stories and political alliances in early American history. You have almost certainly heard the name Pocahontas. You probably picture the Disney version. Let us replace that with something much more complex, and frankly, much more compelling. Her true name was Amanute, though she was also called Matoaka. Pocahontas was a childhood nickname meaning something close to playful one or ill-behaved child. She was the daughter of Wahan-Sinaka, known to the English as Chief Powhatan, a leader of enormous political influence who commanded an alliance of roughly 30 Algonquian-speaking tribes across the Chesapeake region. This was not a small chiefdom. This was a confederacy. John Rolfe arrived in Jamestown in 1610, a widower, an English settler who would eventually develop a strain of tobacco called Nicotiana tabacum, milder than native varieties and perfectly tailored to European markets. He would eventually make Virginia's economy. But that story begins with Pocahontas. She was held captive by the English as a political lever, a means to negotiate the release of English prisoners and weapons held by her father. During her captivity, she was taken to Henricus, a small settlement near present-day Richmond, placed under the care of a minister named Alexander Whitaker, converted to Christianity, and given the name Rebecca. And there, John Rolfe fell genuinely in love with her. Their marriage in April of 1614 is documented as the first recorded interracial marriage in American history. Her father gave his blessing. He gave them a small house across the James River. And for a window of time, hostilities between the Powhatan Confederacy and the Jamestown settlers paused. The marriage was a peace treaty disguised as a love story, or possibly the other way around. They had a son named Thomas Rolfe. His descendants became part of Virginia's first families, among the most influential lineages in early American society. Pocahontas herself traveled to England, was presented at court, and passed away there in 1617 at roughly 21 years of age, likely from illness. She never made it home. What she left behind was a son, a legacy, and a question that history keeps asking. What would that peace have grown into if she had lived? Let us talk about social architecture. Because one of the most quietly radical things about many Native American civilizations is something that even progressive modern societies have not fully achieved. Many tribes organized themselves into matrilineal clans. That means descent, inheritance, and family identity were traced through the mother's line, not the father's. You belong to your mother's clan. Your children would belong to your wife's clan. Property, rights, and political standing flowed through the women of the family. This was not a footnote. Among the Iroquois Confederacy, one of the most sophisticated governing bodies in pre-colonial North America, the clan mothers held specific political power. They selected the male leaders, the sachems, who represented their nations in the Grand Council. And they could remove those leaders if they failed to serve the people. The leader served at the pleasure of the women who appointed him. The Great Law of Peace, the oral constitution of the Iroquois Confederacy, detailed this structure explicitly. Some historians, including scholars at Cornell and Princeton, have argued that Benjamin Franklin, who attended conferences with Iroquois diplomats in the 1740s, drew direct inspiration from this Confederacy model when he proposed ideas for uniting the American colonies. The notion that sovereign nations could form a functioning union with shared governance was not purely a European invention. It was, in part, a lesson learned from people already living it. Now, I want to share something that seems like a small domestic detail, but is actually a perfect window into how Native American cultures turned everything in their environment into something useful with extraordinary precision. Porcupines were for many tribes a critical resource, not just for food, not just for hide. Their quills, stiff and hollow, and ranging in color from near white to dark brown, became raw material for craft, decoration, and in one particularly practical application, personal grooming. To create hairbrushes, craftspeople would collect quills from hunted animals, clean them carefully, sort them by size and color, and then dye them using natural pigments derived from berries, plants, and minerals. The sorted quills were then attached in parallel rows to a carved wooden or bone handle, with the sharp tips facing outward to create bristle-like traction. The result was a functional, durable hairbrush made entirely from materials the land provided. This is the kind of detail that rewrites how you see these cultures. There was no waste. There was no disposable anything. Every element of the natural world was understood, cataloged, repurposed, and respected. The sophistication was not architectural or military, in the way European history books measured sophistication. It was ecological. It was relational. It was 1,000 years of learning how to live with a land rather than simply on top of it. And then there is the matter of a name that was never theirs to begin with. The word Sioux is one of the most widely used and most misunderstood terms in Native American history. The people it refers to, the great nations of the northern plains, call themselves Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota, all variations meaning friends or the people who dwell in peace. That is their name. That is who they are. The word Sioux came from somewhere entirely different. The Ojibwe people, who had a long history of territorial conflict with the Lakota, used the term Naduesiu, a shortened form roughly meaning snake or enemy. French traders and explorers, navigating unfamiliar territory and relying on Ojibwe guides, picked up the term and applied it without fully grasping that they were using one people's insult to name another. The name spread. It hardened into official use. And for generations, a nation that defined itself by peace and kinship was known to the outside world by its enemy's slur. This is not a minor linguistic accident. It is a pattern. The names imposed on indigenous peoples by European settlers and their indigenous intermediaries were frequently strategic misreadings, deliberate diminishments, or outright errors that calcified into official record. Understanding where those names came from is the first step toward understanding whose perspective shaped the history we inherited. Now, I mentioned at the very start that we would get to the female warriors. And I want you to understand that what follows is not a sidebar. This is not a gentle aside about a few exceptional women. This is a documented, widespread reality that most Western history has spent 2 centuries actively erasing. Do you think the image of the stoic male warrior on horseback, that iconic image burned into 100 Hollywood films, tells the full story? Let me tell you what it leaves out. Many Native American women were accomplished riders and formidable combatants. Across the plains, women did not merely support warriors from a distance. They trained, they rode, they fought, they led. At the Battle of the Rosebud in June of 1876, just days before the Battle of Little Bighorn, indigenous women were documented among the warriors who engaged General Crook's forces. Among the most remarkable documented figures was Lozin, a warrior and prophetess of the Shoshone Apache in the late 19th century. She fought alongside 2 of the most famous Apache leaders in history, her brother Victorio and Geronimo. Lozin was not a support figure. She was a combatant with exceptional tracking abilities, documented sharpshooting skill, and a reputation among both Apache and U.S. Army personnel as someone genuinely dangerous in the field. She reportedly possessed an ability to sense the direction and proximity of enemies, which her people understood as a spiritual gift. She led raids. She scouted. She protected her people through years of conflict with one of the most powerful military forces in the world. Then there is Toipurina, a Tongva medicine woman of California, who, at roughly 23 years of age, organized and led an uprising against the San Gabriel Mission in 1785. The Spanish colonial mission system had systematically dismantled Tongva culture, forced labor, suppressed traditional practices, and severed communities from their spiritual foundations. Toi Purina mobilized leaders from multiple villages. She was the architect. She was the face of the resistance. When Spanish authorities captured the conspirators, they described her with a combination of fear and reluctant admiration. She was eventually exiled to a distant mission and baptized into the Catholic faith. Yet even her captors documented her defiance during her trial as something beyond ordinary. These women were not exceptions. They were products of civilizations that understood power, courage, and leadership as attributes that belong to human beings, not exclusively to men. The Iroquois clan mothers, who appointed and removed political leaders. The Plains women who rode and fought alongside their tribes. The California medicine woman, who organized a multi-village resistance at 23. The story of Native America cannot be told as a story of male warriors and passive women. That version is not history. It is mythology built to comfort a particular kind of reader. Looking at all of this, I want to ask you something genuinely. When you think about civilization, what do you picture? A city, a written language, a standing army, a legal code? Because the peoples we have talked about today had all of those things. They had languages, some of which they were actively developing into written form. The Cherokee, one of the 5 nations referred to by early white settlers as the 5 civilized tribes, a term that revealed far more about European arrogance than Cherokee culture, developed a fully functional written syllabary in the early 19th century, created by a man named Sequoyah. Within years of its introduction, literacy rates among the Cherokee exceeded those of many white settler communities. They had newspapers, they had literature, they had governance documents. The label civilized in that phrase, 5 civilized tribes, was meant as a compliment by those who used it. It is actually an indictment. It says that the Choctaw, Cherokee, Creek, Chickasaw, and Seminole nations were granted a degree of recognition only because their visible structures resembled European ones closely enough to be legible to European observers. The thousands of other indigenous nations, with different but equally sophisticated ways of organizing society, were simply invisible to that frame of evaluation. The Sundance was not primitive. Lacrosse was not a pastime. Matrilineal governance was not a curiosity. Porcupine quill brushes were not a novelty. Lausanne was not an anomaly. These are pieces of a civilization, actually dozens of distinct civilizations, that were systematically misunderstood, misnamed, and misrepresented, not by accident, but as a feature of how conquest justifies itself. When you can frame what you are taking as lesser than what you are bringing, the math of history starts to feel cleaner than it was. It is not clean. What we have covered today is barely a surface scratch. 9 facts, 9 windows into a world of thousands of nations, hundreds of languages, tens of thousands of years of human ingenuity and adaptation and meaning-making on this continent. The Sundance endures. Lacrosse is played in Olympic stadiums. Dozens of Algonquian words live in your mouth every day. The descendants of Pocahontas and John Rolfe shaped the foundations of early America. The legacy of Lausanne and Toiporina reverberates through every indigenous woman who has ever stood in front of power and refused to move. The question worth sitting with is this: what else was there that we have not yet found the language to see? Let me know in the comments which of these facts landed hardest for you. Was it the Sundance? Was it Lausanne? Was it the realization that Sioux was never their word? Because I read every comment, and these conversations are the best part of doing this. If you want to go deeper on any of these topics, I have linked sources in the description below. And if you have not already, subscribe to Frontier Uncensored. We put out new episodes every week, and every single one of them is built on the same premise. The real history is always more extraordinary than the version we were handed in school.